During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast sea, never remaining in one location for very long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear, pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment that we rented in Pennsylvania, so on and so forth. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were made just yesterday. I often wonder whether they are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring. But in my heart, I know they're real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the first 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, least within an hour's commute of my father's workplace. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least the next 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my stuff was already sealed away in boxes, leaving my room bare. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day. They served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I didn't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with the mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was so large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. You kind of look like a Furby, I said, as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. Furby? What's a Furby? He asked. I shrugged. You know, the toy. The little robot with the big ears. You can stroke and feed them, almost like a real pet. Oh, Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappeared every time my mother stopped by to check on me. I lay under your bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me, because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and the pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us play. It's a secret game. After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under my bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of the hallway, he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me from leaving my bed without permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across it and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was further than 2 stories due to the incline. "I like to play pretend up here," Mr. Widemouth explained. "I pretend that there is a big, soft trampoline below the window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try." I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibilities. "It's a long drop," I said, "but that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be exciting if it was only a short drop. If it were only that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline." I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eye. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. "If you say so." He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived, holding a small box. "I want to teach you how to juggle," he said. "There are some things in here you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons." I looked into the box. It was full of knives. "My parents would kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. "I'll get spanked and grounded for a year." Mr. Widemouth frowned. "It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it." I pushed the box away. "I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw around in the air." Mr. Widemouth frowned, and it deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was underneath me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up in the night, saying that he had made a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came one morning and told me I had her permission to walk outside. She thought the fresh air might do me good, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feel of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. "I have something I want you to see," he said. I must have given him a weird look, because then he said, "It's safe, I promise." I followed him to the beginnings of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. "This is an important path. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there." And returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond the trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of things had been packed into the moving truck. I would soon be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I was leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that his intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime, with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man about to run a marathon, not one about to spend 2 days sitting very still. "Early enough for you?" he asked, with a hint of sympathy. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard on you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down, and you can make some friends." I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. Mr. Widemouth's silhouette was in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn into the main road, at which point he gave a pitiful wave goodbye, steak knife in one hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house had stood on was empty, except for the foundation, as the building had burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.